On the coldest night of winter, Sawyer Lennox heard 3 faint scratches at his cabin door. Outside, a starving German shepherd stood over 3 puppies, using the last warmth in her body to keep them alive. She did not trust him, and she did not ask for kindness. She simply refused to abandon her young. Sawyer opened his home, never knowing that the wounded mother had escaped from one of the valley's most powerful farms. What she carried was not a secret she could explain, but a fear her body had never forgotten. Saving 4 dogs would force a broken veteran to decide whether courage meant fighting alone or finally trusting others to stand beside him. Stay with their story, then tell us where you are watching from and what choice you would have made. At midnight, White Cedar Valley had almost disappeared. The forest beyond Sawyer Lennox's windows was no longer a collection of birch trunks, frozen brush, and narrow animal trails. It had become one pale, shifting wall. Snow swept sideways beneath the moon, filling the spaces between the trees and smoothing the earth until the whole valley looked untouched by feet, wheels, or human grief. Inside the cabin, the fire had settled into a bed of low orange coals. Sawyer sat at the work table with an old tabletop radio opened in front of him. Its wooden casing had been removed, exposing a row of dusty tubes, thin wires, and metal parts that seemed too delicate to have survived so many winters. He held a screwdriver between his scarred fingers and listened to the faint crackle in the speaker. Static, then silence. He adjusted a wire with the careful patience he usually reserved for wooden boat ribs and damaged engines. Repair work made sense to him. A broken object rarely lied about what it needed. Splintered wood required glue and pressure. A burned wire needed replacing. A frozen hinge needed heat. People were rarely so honest. Sawyer leaned closer to the radio. His ash-brown hair was cut short and neat, silver beginning to show at both temples. A narrow scar angled across his right cheek, pale against skin weathered by years of cold air and open water. His gray-blue eyes remained fixed on the circuit board, though fatigue had deepened the shadows beneath them. He wore an old green camouflage field shirt over a charcoal thermal layer, the sleeves folded with military precision. The fabric had faded at the elbows but remained clean. On his left wrist, an old dive watch ticked beneath a dark blue strap. Its glass carried a diagonal scratch that caught the firelight each time he moved his hand. The radio gave a brief burst of music. A woman sang 3 notes from some forgotten winter song. Then the speaker died again. Sawyer stared at it. "Progress," he said. His voice sounded unfamiliar in the quiet room. He reached for the screwdriver again when something breathed outside the door. Sawyer stopped moving. The sound was faint enough to have been wind pressing through the porch boards. But wind did not pause to gather itself. Wind did not exhale in a trembling rush and then go still. He turned his head toward the door. Nothing followed. The cabin settled around him. A log shifted in the stove. Ice clicked against the window. Somewhere in the rafters, old wood contracted beneath the cold. Sawyer waited. Years of training had taught him that the first sound was often the least important one. The second revealed whether it had been an accident. A soft scrape moved across the lower part of the door. Then came 3 scratches. Weak, uneven. The first dragged downward. The second barely touched the wood. The third ended with a dull thump, as though whatever had made it could no longer hold itself upright. Sawyer stood. He did not rush. He closed the radio casing, placed the screwdriver flat on the table, and reached for the hunting rifle resting beside the stone fireplace. Bears were asleep this time of year, but hunger could wake almost anything. Coyotes sometimes approached isolated houses during hard winters. Injured animals were unpredictable. Desperate people could be worse. He checked the chamber by habit, then crossed the room. At the door, he listened again. A low sound came through the timber. Not a snarl. A whine, cut short, as if the animal outside had decided even that small confession of pain was too dangerous. Sawyer lifted the wooden bar and opened the door. Cold struck him across the face. Snow rushed into the cabin in a swirl, melting against the floorboards. For several seconds, he saw nothing beyond the porch except moonlight scattered through the storm. Then a pair of dark brown eyes looked up at him. A German shepherd sat beneath the edge of the roof. She was large but terribly thin, her ribs visible beneath a coat of charcoal black and burned amber. Ice clung to her fur in rough plaits. Her right ear stood straight, alert despite exhaustion, while the left leaned slightly outward. Blood stained the snow beneath one front paw. She did not try to enter. She sat with her chest lifted, though every tremor in her body revealed what that posture cost. Behind her, half hidden by her body, 3 puppies lay pressed together in a shallow hollow beneath the porch steps. Sawyer lowered the rifle. The smallest puppy was curled tightly on its side. Its honey-brown fur was dusted white, and a dark patch surrounded its left eye like an uneven mask. Beside it lay a broader male with oversized paws and a black saddle across his back. The third puppy, a smaller female with dark markings around both eyes, had her nose tucked beneath the others. The mother had placed herself between them and the storm. Sawyer's gaze returned to her. She looked at his face, then at the rifle in his hands. Slowly, he leaned the weapon against the inside wall. The dog watched every movement. "All right," Sawyer said quietly. "That stays there." He stepped onto the porch. The shepherd's lips lifted just enough to reveal the edges of her teeth. The growl came low from her chest. It was not loud. There was no strength left for loudness. Sawyer stopped. In the moonlight, he saw that the fur along her left shoulder had separated around an old scar. He saw cracked pads, a strip of worn leather still fastened around her neck, and milk dried into the fur beneath her belly. A mother. Not merely a stray protecting a convenient pack. These were hers. Sawyer crouched several feet away. Snow collected on his shoulders and darkened his hair. "I'm not taking them from you." The dog could not understand the sentence, but she understood distance. She understood empty hands. Sawyer removed his gloves and placed them in the snow. Then he unbuttoned his field shirt, pulled it off over the thermal layer, and spread it between them. The smallest puppy coughed. The sound was tiny and wet. The shepherd turned instantly. Her body shifted toward the pup, but one front leg buckled beneath her. She caught herself before falling and pushed her shoulder against the porch post. Something tightened beneath Sawyer's ribs. He had seen that refusal before, the body already finished, the will continuing on alone. For one brief moment, the porch was not a porch. It was a room filled with smoke, shouted coordinates, and the hard pressure of a dying man's hand against Sawyer's wrist. His thumb found the scratched edge of the dive watch. The shepherd looked at him again, not pleading, measuring, as though she had reached the end of everything she could do and now had to decide whether this stranger was another danger or the last available door. Sawyer slid one knee forward. The growl deepened. He stopped again. "You brought them here," he said. "So either you made a terrible decision or you know something I don't." The dog's ears shifted toward his voice. Behind her, the masked puppy coughed a second time. That changed the distance between them. The shepherd lowered her head. Not in surrender, in decision. Sawyer moved slowly enough that every action could be judged. He reached past the mother without touching her and lifted the smallest puppy from the snow. The little body felt almost weightless. The puppy made a faint sound and pushed its cold nose against Sawyer's wrist. The mother rose halfway. Sawyer held still, cradling the puppy against his thermal shirt. Her eyes stayed locked on his arms. Then she looked toward the open cabin, where firelight spilled across the floor. Sawyer placed the pup in the faded camouflage shirt and folded the cloth around it. He carried the bundle inside, laid it several feet from the stove, and returned immediately. The shepherd had not moved. The other 2 puppies remained beneath her chest. Sawyer repeated the process. He carried the broad-pawed male inside next, then the watchful female. The mother followed each journey with her eyes but stayed on the porch until the third puppy disappeared through the doorway. Only then did she attempt to stand. Her hind legs trembled. One paw slipped on the icy board. Sawyer extended a hand but did not touch her. "You can walk in," he said, "or I can carry you. I suspect neither of us would enjoy the second option." The dog stared at him. A gust drove snow beneath the porch roof. At last she stepped across the threshold. One step, then another. Her claws clicked against the wood. She reached the puppies, lowered her nose to each of them, and inspected their faces with urgent, precise movements. Only after confirming that all 3 were alive did her legs fold. She collapsed beside them without a sound. Sawyer shut the door. The cabin suddenly seemed much smaller. He moved the puppies farther from the stove to avoid warming them too quickly, then gathered towels, a wool blanket, and 2 glass bottles. He filled the bottles with warm water and wrapped them in cloth before placing them around the nest. The mother opened one eye. "I know," he said. "You're reviewing my work." She closed it again. Sawyer found his telephone on the wall and dialed the veterinary clinic. It rang 6 times before someone answered. "Sawyer?" Elodie Park sounded awake, which likely meant she had not gone to bed yet. She was the only veterinarian within 30 miles and seemed to consider normal sleeping hours a poor use of time. "I have 4 German Shepherds in my house." A pause followed. "Did they make an appointment?" "3 are puppies. The mother is injured. They came out of the storm." Elodie's tone changed immediately. "How cold are they?" "Very." "Don't put them directly against the stove. Warm them gradually. Towels, wrapped bottles, blankets. Are the puppies conscious?" "2 are moving. The smallest is coughing." "Do you have corn syrup?" Sawyer looked toward the kitchen. "Probably." "Rub a tiny amount on the gums if the smallest is weak, but don't pour anything into the mouth. No cow's milk. I'll talk you through an electrolyte mix. Roads are closed near the ridge. I can't reach you until the plow comes through." Sawyer took a pencil from beside the radio and wrote on the back of an unopened electricity bill as Elodie gave him instructions. The mother watched him throughout the call. He prepared warm water, salt, and a small amount of sugar. He softened some canned food he kept for the half-wild barn cat that occasionally visited his shed. When he placed a bowl near the shepherd, she sniffed it but did not eat. Instead, she pushed her nose toward the puppies. "Of course," Sawyer murmured. He moved the food to the 3 smaller bowls. The broad-pawed male tried to step into his and nearly fell face first. The female watched before taking a careful bite. The smallest pup only licked a little liquid from Sawyer's fingertip. The mother did not eat until all 3 had taken something. By dawn, the storm had weakened. The puppies slept beneath the blanket, packed together beside the warm bottles. The mother remained awake, her body curved around them. Sawyer pulled on his parka and went outside. The new snow had softened the trail but had not erased it completely. Paw prints led away from the porch toward the southeastern woods, the direction of Sloane Crest. The farm sat less than 2 miles away beyond a ridge of birch trees. Sawyer followed the trail. The mother's prints were deep and irregular. The puppies' marks appeared beside them, vanished, then reappeared farther ahead. In several places, the shepherd's path doubled back. Near a frozen drainage ditch, Sawyer found a long slide cut into the snow. At its base were the tiny marks of the masked puppy. Around them, the mother's claws had carved deep trenches into the ice. She had gone back for him. Farther along, another cluster of tracks showed where one puppy had sheltered beneath a fallen cedar. Again, the mother's trail turned around. She had not led the 3 pups through the storm in a single desperate march. She had moved them in stages, returning again and again, refusing to leave one behind even as her own strength disappeared. Sawyer stood in the quiet woods, looking at the intersecting tracks. His thumb rested against the scratched dive watch. For years, he had remembered only the man he had failed to bring home. The dog had crossed the same frozen ground more than once because she had apparently never considered returning alone an acceptable outcome. Sawyer turned back toward the cabin. Inside, the mother lifted her head the moment he entered. The puppies remained asleep against her belly. He took off his parka and lowered himself onto the floor several feet away. He did not attempt to touch her. The shepherd watched him. Sawyer leaned his back against the wall. Exhaustion pressed behind his eyes, but he did not go to bed. He pulled another blanket over his legs and rested one hand beside him on the floor, palm open. The mother shifted, not toward him, only enough to place more of her body between Sawyer and the puppies. He understood the message. Trust had not arrived with the sunrise, but neither had she asked him to leave. Sawyer closed his eyes. Around him, the cabin breathed differently now. The rough exhale of the mother, the soft whistles of 3 sleeping puppies, the quiet ticking of a damaged watch, and the dying fire settling into ash. For years, Sawyer had believed silence was the safest thing he could keep inside these walls. That morning, silence was gone, and for the first time he did not want it back. By 9 the next morning, Sawyer Lennox's cabin had acquired 4 new sounds. The first was Bramble chewing something he had no business possessing. The second was Mica's nails clicking carefully across the floorboards as she inspected each corner of the room. The third was Pipkin's small, congested snore from inside Sawyer's right boot. The fourth was Vesper's silence. It was not the silence of sleep. Sawyer knew the difference. Sleep loosened a body. Vesper remained folded around her puppies with one ear lifted and her head resting on her paws, every muscle prepared to respond. Sawyer stood at the stove, spooning softened food into shallow bowls. Behind him came a wet ripping sound. He turned. Bramble had found one of his work gloves and was dragging it beneath the table with the grim determination of a wolf hauling down a deer. "That glove has survived 11 winters," Sawyer said. Bramble pulled harder. "It has survived engine oil, fishing hooks, and one regrettable incident involving a belt sander." The puppy vanished under the table. Sawyer looked at Vesper. She did not appear interested in disciplinary matters. "Your management style is very relaxed." A low engine sounded beyond the cabin. Vesper was standing before Sawyer heard the tires crunch onto the cleared portion of the drive. Her body moved between the puppies and the door. The fur along her shoulders rose. Mica retreated beneath the table. Bramble abandoned the glove. Pipkin slept through the entire alarm, one hind leg hanging over the boot's edge. Sawyer crossed to the window. A dark blue pickup pushed slowly through the snow, followed by a county patrol vehicle. The storm had broken overnight, leaving the valley bright and hard-edged beneath a clean winter sun. The pickup stopped first. Dr. Elodie Park climbed out carrying 2 medical bags and a folded canvas crate. She was small and quick, with black hair tied low at the back of her neck and a charcoal veterinary coat buttoned over an olive sweater. A silver fox pin caught the sunlight near her collar. The woman emerging from the patrol vehicle moved more deliberately. Deputy Mara Kestrel was taller, broad through the shoulders, with a square face and short chestnut hair tucked behind one ear. Her dark green county uniform was partly hidden beneath a winter patrol coat. A red notebook already rested in one gloved hand. Sawyer opened the door before they knocked. Vesper growled. Elodie stopped on the porch and looked past Sawyer. "That is either a welcome," she said, "or a formal complaint." She hasn't clarified. Elodie lowered both medical bags to the boards. She did not enter. Mara remained a step behind her, studying the room without staring directly at Vesper. "Mother and 3 pups?" Mara asked. "Yes. Any change since last night?" "The smallest is still coughing. The mother drank, ate half a bowl." "Vomiting?" "Once." Elodie nodded. "Good. Not the vomiting. The fact that you remembered." "I do occasionally listen. I've heard rumors." She removed her gloves and crouched outside the threshold. Instead of reaching for Vesper, she placed a small piece of food on the floor and waited. Vesper's eyes moved from Elodie to Sawyer. Sawyer stepped aside. The dog sniffed the air but did not approach. "That's fine," Elodie said. "She doesn't owe me trust on arrival." She entered only after Sawyer carried Pipkin from the boot and placed him beside the others. Mara followed with slower steps, taking care not to block the doorway. The examination began with the puppies. Mica objected by becoming completely limp, which forced Elodie to hold her like a sack of flour while listening to her heart. "She believes resistance is beneath her," Elodie said. Mica stared at Sawyer with dark ringed eyes. "She may be right." Bramble attempted to eat the stethoscope. Pipkin coughed twice during the examination. Elodie's humor faded. She listened again, longer this time, then checked his gums and temperature. "Mild respiratory infection," she said. "Possibly made worse by exposure. He's thin, but his lungs don't sound severely compromised." Sawyer's shoulders eased by less than an inch. Elodie noticed. "He still needs watching." "I assumed so." "You were already preparing to ignore the reassuring part." "I heard it." "You stored it somewhere inaccessible." Mara hid the beginning of a smile behind her red notebook. Vesper's examination took longer. The dog allowed Elodie within arm's reach only after Sawyer sat on the floor near the wall. Even then, Vesper kept one side pressed against the puppies. Elodie moved with no wasted motion. She checked the injured paw, the dog's teeth, ears, abdomen, and hydration. Beneath the dense fur, Vesper's ribs were sharper than they had appeared the night before. When Elodie touched the left shoulder, Vesper flinched. "Old scar," she said. "Not recent." She examined the cracked paw pads, then watched Vesper stand and take several steps. The dog's back legs trembled. Elodie's eyes narrowed. "Has that been happening since she arrived?" "On and off." "Only when standing?" "No. Once while resting." Elodie drew a small blood sample. Vesper did not snap, but her gaze never left the needle. Sawyer kept his open hand on the floor between them. When the sample was finished, Vesper lowered her nose toward his fingers. She did not touch him. Not yet. Elodie collected urine using a shallow tray during a brief trip outside. She also sealed a stained section of blanket where Vesper had vomited during the night. Dehydration and exhaustion could explain the tremors, she said. So could low blood sugar, cold exposure, pain, infection, or something she ate. We test before we invent. Sawyer looked toward Vesper. "I wasn't inventing." "You were about to." He did not answer. Mara began documenting the injuries. She photographed the cracked paw pads, the worn collar, Vesper's body condition, and the puppy's thin frames. She weighed each animal on a portable scale while reading the numbers aloud. Her manner was gentle, but not sentimental. Every observation entered the red notebook in compact handwriting. "Do you know where they came from?" Mara asked. "Tracks led southeast." "Sloane Crest?" "Likely." Mara took a handheld scanner from her bag and passed it over Vesper's shoulders. The device beeped. Vesper jerked away so quickly that her hindquarters struck the table leg. Sawyer lowered himself at once, not touching her, only making his body smaller. "It's finished," he said. Vesper's breathing remained fast. Mara read the number on the scanner, then called county dispatch. While she waited, Pipkin crawled across the floor and pressed himself against Vesper's front leg. The mother's breathing slowed. Mara ended the call several minutes later. "The chip is registered to Sloane Crest Holdings." The name seemed to alter the room without changing anything visible. Sloane Crest was more than a farm. It was the largest cattle operation in White Cedar Valley, a place of black fencing, silver grain silos, and trucks that traveled the county roads in every season. Merrick Sloan donated to the volunteer fire department, sponsored the winter market, and owned enough property that many families lived in houses connected to his payroll. Mara looked at Sawyer. "This doesn't mean she goes back today." Vesper had begun nudging the nearest food bowl with her nose. Instead of eating, she pushed it toward the puppies. Mara watched the movement. "It also doesn't mean ownership disappears," she continued. "I can document probable neglect and place them under emergency veterinary hold pending review. Elodie's clinic would normally take custody. My clinic currently has 2 injured hounds, an elderly mastiff, and a goat who has developed a personal grudge against doors," Elodie said. "I have nowhere safe for a nursing shepherd and 3 puppies." Sawyer understood where both women were looking. "No." Elodie folded her arms. Mara opened the red notebook. Sawyer looked from them to the dogs. Bramble had recovered the glove. Mica had discovered the cabinet beneath the sink and was examining the gap along the door. Pipkin leaned against Vesper with his eyes half closed. The cabin had once required very little from Sawyer. Wood for the stove, kerosene for the lamps, food for 1 person, silence enough to make the days pass without leaving marks. Now there were bowls on the floor, wet towels over chairbacks, paw prints near the stove, and a torn glove disappearing beneath the table. "I'm not running a shelter," he said. "No one asked you to," Mara replied. "This would be temporary foster care under veterinary supervision. I document the placement. Elodie determines treatment. You contact us if anyone tries to remove them. And if the owner objects, he can request a hearing." Sawyer glanced at Vesper. The dog met his eyes, then looked away first. Temporary. The word should have made the decision easier. It did not. He touched the edge of the watch on his wrist. "I'll keep them until the review." Mara wrote the statement down. Elodie smiled only with one corner of her mouth. "You say that as if they haven't already taken possession." Bramble emerged from beneath the table with half the glove hanging from his mouth. Sawyer stared at him. "That is not possession. That is theft. By late afternoon, the cabin had been reorganized. Elodie left antibiotics for Pipkin, topical treatment for Vesper's paw, measured portions of recovery food, and instructions detailed enough to suggest she had little faith in Sawyer's ability to improvise responsibly. Mara installed a temporary county notice beside the door, stating that the dogs were under emergency protective hold. Before leaving, she gave Sawyer her direct number. "If anyone comes for them, you call me. I can handle a conversation. I'm not concerned about your ability to handle it. I'm concerned about whether you'll remember that handling something and handling it legally are not always the same thing." She said it without accusation. That made it harder to dismiss. After the vehicles disappeared through the trees, the house seemed quieter for perhaps 7 seconds. Then Mica opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Sawyer heard the wooden door tap the wall. He turned. The puppy stood with her front paws inside the cabinet, staring at a roll of cloth towels as if she had uncovered buried treasure. "No." Mica pulled one loose. Bramble saw the moving cloth and joined her. Within moments, both puppies were backing across the floor with the same towel between their teeth. Pipkin watched from the boot. Sawyer crossed the room, retrieved the towel, closed the cabinet, and tied the handles together with cord. Mica sat down. Her expression suggested she was already studying the knot. Over the next several days, Sawyer discovered that living with 4 dogs did not simply create noise. It rearranged time. Meals came in measured intervals. Medicine came at fixed hours. Towels had to be washed. Snow had to be cleared from a small section of yard so the puppies could relieve themselves without disappearing chest deep. Vesper remained watchful. She hid part of every meal beneath the edge of the blanket, even after Sawyer began feeding them on schedule. She slept with her body across the entrance to the nest. When Sawyer carried firewood inside, she stiffened at the sight of the long pieces in his arms. The first time it happened, Sawyer stopped in the doorway. He looked at the wood, then at Vesper. Slowly he placed the logs on the floor and stepped away. Only after she relaxed did he carry them to the stove one at a time. He never tried to correct the fear. He simply changed how he moved around it. Vesper noticed. Trust did not arrive as affection. It appeared in smaller permissions. She allowed Sawyer to replace her bandage while Elodie spoke through the telephone. She stopped waking every time he crossed the room. She ate before the puppies had completely finished. On the 4th evening, Sawyer returned Pipkin to the blanket after giving him medicine. Vesper watched him settle the puppy beside her belly. Sawyer withdrew his hands. Vesper did not immediately cover Pipkin with her body. She let Sawyer's scent remain on him. That night, Pipkin's breathing worsened. Sawyer woke to a thin rasp from beside the stove. The puppy's neck stretched forward with each breath. He was on the floor before he was fully awake. Vesper stood over Pipkin, trembling. Sawyer reached for him. The mother's lips lifted. For one suspended second, the distance they had crossed over 4 days seemed to vanish. Then Pipkin coughed and sagged. Vesper stepped aside. Sawyer wrapped the puppy in a towel and called Elodie. He placed the phone on the floor while she instructed him to keep Pipkin's chest elevated, clear his nostrils, and watch the color of his gums. Sawyer's hands remained steady. His breathing did not. Pipkin seemed impossibly small between them. Every shallow breath awakened an older room in Sawyer's memory, another body under his hands, another voice telling him to make a decision quickly. The watch on his wrist pressed against the puppy's ribs. Not that room, Sawyer told himself, not that night. He listened to Elodie. He watched Pipkin rather than the memory. He adjusted the towel, kept the airway open, and counted each breath aloud. Gradually, the rasp softened. Pipkin sneezed, licked Sawyer's thumb, and released a weary sigh. Sawyer closed his eyes. When he opened them, Vesper stood close enough that her chest nearly touched his shoulder. Slowly she lowered her head. Her muzzle passed over Pipkin first. Then she rested the weight of her head across Sawyer's wrist. The scratched dive watch lay between them. Sawyer did not move. Vesper stayed there for only a few seconds before returning to her puppies. It was not forgiveness. There had been nothing to forgive. It was not surrender. It was recognition. The following morning, Elodie collected the prepared samples for the state laboratory. She repeated that the tremors could have several causes and that no one should decide the answer before the evidence returned. 3 days later, Sawyer was repairing a cabinet hinge when the telephone rang. A man introduced himself as counsel for Sloan Crest Holdings. His voice was polished, almost warm. The company, he explained, was grateful that Sawyer had sheltered its animals. Sloan Crest would reimburse all food, veterinary expenses, damaged property, and inconvenience. In return, a representative could collect the dogs that afternoon. Sawyer looked across the room. Mica sat in front of the newly secured cabinet, studying the cord. Bramble slept with his head on Sawyer's surviving glove. Pipkin lay between Vesper's paws. Vesper watched Sawyer hold the telephone. "The animals are under county protective hold," he said. "There may be some misunderstanding." "There isn't. Mr. Sloan is their lawful owner." "Then Mr. Sloan can speak to Deputy Kestrel." The voice remained courteous. "Surely we can resolve this without unnecessary proceedings." Sawyer's thumb moved across the scratched watch face. "No." He ended the call. That afternoon, a gray pickup passed the cabin twice. It did not stop. The next day, a black SUV slowed near the end of the drive before continuing toward the ridge. On the third evening, Sawyer found fresh tire marks where the county road met his property. Inside, Vesper stood at the window, perfectly still. Her right ear pointed forward. Her damaged left ear leaned toward the sound fading through the trees. Sawyer closed the curtain. The house was no longer quiet, but now the silence outside had begun to feel deliberate. The laboratory report arrived on a Tuesday morning while Sawyer was repairing a split-cedar paddle at the kitchen table. Elodie called before sending the document, which told him the news was not simple. "The state lab found clenbuterol in Vesper's samples," she said. Sawyer stopped sanding. Across the room, Vesper lay near the stove while the puppies occupied themselves with a length of rope Bramble had stolen from the mudroom. Mica watched him pull it backward. Pipkin watched Mica, apparently waiting for her to decide whether the game was worth joining. Sawyer looked at Vesper. "How much?" "Enough to confirm exposure. Not enough to tell us when, how often, or through what source." His hand tightened around the paddle. "Sloan Crest." "No." The answer came quickly enough to irritate him. "No?" "No conclusions," Elodie said. "Not yet." She explained that clenbuterol could produce tremors, rapid breathing, weakness, and abnormal heart rhythms. It could also remain detectable after accidental ingestion. Vesper might have eaten medicated feed beneath a cattle trough, licked residue from a container, or been exposed somewhere unrelated to the farm. Sawyer stared at the pale strip of cedar beneath his hand. She came from Sloan Crest. She was registered there. That is not the same as proving the source of exposure. She was underfed, injured, and 2 miles from their property. All true. And you still think it could be a coincidence? I think facts are allowed to be suspicious without becoming a verdict. Sawyer set the sandpaper down. Elodie's voice softened, though only slightly. "I'm reporting the result tomorrow. She'll contact the state agriculture office. Until then, you do not visit that farm, confront anyone, collect anything, or follow a truck because it looks guilty. Trucks don't look guilty. You would find a way." The call ended with instructions to monitor Vesper's heart rate and report any worsening tremors. Sawyer remained at the table long after the telephone went quiet. Vesper lifted her head. For several days, the tremors had become less frequent. Her appetite had improved. The cracked paw pads were beginning to close, yet the result gave every earlier symptom a second meaning. Sawyer knew the danger of meanings assembled after the fact. Memory could turn scattered sounds into warnings no one had actually heard. Guilt could rebuild an old room until every shadow seemed obvious. He looked down at the scratched watch on his left wrist. The laboratory result did not prove Sloan Crest had done anything. It only proved something had entered Vesper's body that should not have been there. That afternoon, Mara sent him the contact information for Celeste Arbor, an investigator with the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. Sawyer expected a formal interview. Instead, Celeste called while he was clearing snow from the back steps. Her voice was calm and unhurried. "Deputy Kestrel says you documented the dog's trail from your property. I took photographs from my land and the public roadside. Did you cross onto Sloane Crest property? No. Did you remove anything from the road? No. Good. Keep it that way. Celeste explained that one positive sample from a dog could justify a preliminary review, but not an inspection order. The agency would need corroboration, feed records, livestock symptoms, environmental samples, transportation irregularities, or credible witness statements. "What do you need from me?" Sawyer asked. "Accuracy." The answer was not what he expected. "If you see something from a public road, write down the date, time, weather, vehicle description, and direction of travel. Do not interpret it. Do not improve it. Do not tell me what you think it means. Tell me what happened." Sawyer rested the shovel against the wall. "And if nothing happens? Then write down nothing." She ended the call before he could ask another question. For the next week, Sawyer became a student of ordinary things. He did not sit in the dark with binoculars. He did not follow vehicles through the county. He drove his usual routes to the hardware store, the lakeside repair shed, and Elodie's clinic. When he passed the public road bordering Sloane Crest, he noted what was visible. Monday, 11:42 p.m. White box truck, no company logo, entered East Service Road. Wednesday, 2:18 a.m. Dark livestock trailer, rear plate obscured by frozen mud, left south gate. Friday, 12:07 a.m. Flatbed carrying sealed blue drums, turned toward equipment barn. The details formed no clear accusation. Farms received deliveries at strange hours. Winter schedules were built around weather, animal needs, and roads that became impassable without warning. Still, something bothered him. Sloane Crest's public filings described the operation as a cattle farm and feed purchaser, not a distributor or chemical storage site. Yet the late-night trucks often entered through the equipment road rather than the feed entrance. Sawyer sent the notes to Mara without commentary. He did not send the private list he kept beside them. Why no company markings? Why after midnight? Why use the old equipment road? The list belonged to suspicion. The official notes belonged to fact. The distinction was harder to maintain than he expected. 3 days later, Merrick Sloane arrived at the cabin. He came shortly after noon in a black SUV clean enough to look unnatural on the salt-streaked road. Sawyer saw the vehicle from the workshop window and stepped outside before it reached the porch. Vesper stood behind the front window with the puppies gathered around her legs. Merrick emerged alone. He was tall, silver-haired, and dressed as if winter were a social inconvenience rather than a force of nature. His midnight blue wool coat fell cleanly over a dark green vest and white shirt. Black leather boots touched the snow without seeming to belong in it. On his right hand, a pale metal signet ring caught the light as he closed the vehicle door. "Sawyer Lennox," he said. His voice carried warmth with no evidence of effort. "Merrick Sloane. I appreciate you seeing me. I'm standing in my yard." Merrick smiled. "That may be the Michigan version of hospitality." He carried a narrow leather folder under one arm. Sawyer noticed that he had not brought a lawyer, employee, or animal transport crate. That was deliberate. Merrick approached only as far as the bottom porch step. "I understand there has been some confusion regarding my dog. County has her under protective hold." "Yes, I spoke with Deputy Kestrel." "Then there's no confusion." Merrick opened the folder and held out copies of registration records, breeding documents, and training certificates. "Vesper is a valuable working animal. She was raised on my property and trained to assist with herd movement, perimeter security, and livestock recovery." Sawyer did not take the papers. Behind the glass, Vesper had gone rigid. Her right ear pointed toward Merrick. The damaged left ear tilted backward. She was not barking. Merrick glanced toward the window. "There she is." Something entered his expression. Not affection exactly, but possession confirmed. Vesper moved sideways until her body blocked the puppies from view. Sawyer stepped between Merrick and the window. She was found underweight, injured, and nearly frozen. A section of fencing failed during the storm. She got out before my staff realized it, with 3 puppies. She recently whelped in one of the auxiliary shelters. An unheated shelter? Merrick's smile remained. Agricultural buildings are not suburban living rooms, Mr. Lennox. No, but most of them have food. For the first time, a small silence opened between them. Merrick touched his signet ring and turned it once around his finger. My attorney offered to cover all expenses. I heard him. I'm offering again. She's not mine to give you. But you are the one refusing access. The county is refusing access. Merrick studied him with patient interest. You were an officer, weren't you? Sawyer did not respond. Navy Special Operations, decorated, retired early. That information public? Most information is public if one has enough patience. The puppies moved inside. A bowl scraped across the floor. Merrick's gaze stayed on Sawyer. Men like us develop habits, he said. We assess threats. We identify patterns. We assign intention before others notice danger. Men like us? Men responsible for keeping complex systems alive. You raise cattle. I employ 83 people. I keep families housed. I negotiate contracts that determine whether this valley prospers or disappears. And Vesper? A working asset that escaped during a storm. The phrase landed harder than an insult would have. Sawyer looked toward the window. Vesper remained hidden behind him, but he could feel her attention fixed on the voices outside. Merrick lowered the folder. I don't doubt that you believe you're protecting her. Good. But belief can become appetite. Sawyer's eyes returned to him. Merrick's voice remained almost kind. You spent your adult life in conflict. Then conflict ended. Men rarely admit how difficult peace can be when no one needs them. The cold seemed to sharpen around Sawyer. For an instant he saw the interior of the transport plane before his last mission. Red light, straps against metal walls. His teammate leaning close to repeat a warning Sawyer had already dismissed. Possible second access team. Sawyer had chosen the cleaner route. The route had been clean until it wasn't. Merrick continued. You may be looking at an unfortunate animal welfare issue and building an enemy because an enemy is easier to understand than uncertainty. Sawyer heard Elodie's voice in memory. Facts are allowed to be suspicious without becoming a verdict. He hated that Merrick's accusation fit too neatly beside it. Are you finished? Sawyer asked. Merrick's eyes cooled, though the smile remained. I came to recover my property without unnecessary conflict. You came after the legal route failed. I came because civilized people speak before they make trouble for one another. The dogs stay until the review. Merrick closed the folder. Then I suppose the review will decide. He returned to the SUV without raising his voice or issuing a threat. That restraint troubled Sawyer more than anger would have. After the vehicle disappeared, Sawyer remained in the yard. He expected relief. Instead, uncertainty followed him inside. Vesper stood near the stove, her body still between the puppies and the door. Bramble's head appeared beneath her chest. Mica watched Sawyer. Pipkin slept with one paw over his nose. Vesper looked at Sawyer as if waiting for evidence of what the conversation had changed. He removed his coat and placed it on the hook. Nothing, he said. The dog did not relax. Neither did he. That evening, Elodie arrived to recheck Vesper's paw. Sawyer told her about Merrick's visit, including the remarks about his military history. Elodie listened while replacing the bandage. He was trying to destabilize you, she said. Doesn't mean he was wrong. No, it doesn't. Sawyer looked at her. She tied the bandage securely. You wanted me to say he was wrong because he's unpleasant? I didn't want anything. That's rarely true. Elodie sat back on her heels. Your instincts found 4 freezing dogs. They also tell you something about Sloane Crest doesn't fit. Both can be useful. But instinct is a door, Sawyer. It is not the room. Vesper lowered her nose toward the fresh bandage. What if I'm seeing what I need to see? Then evidence will fail to support you, and you will have to accept that. And if it does support me, then you will still need people who know more than you do. The answer annoyed him because it required patience rather than courage. 2 days later, Celeste arranged a video call with a retired feed quality inspector named Russell Keene. Russell appeared on the screen from a kitchen crowded with seed catalogs and coffee mugs. How was 58? Heavy through the shoulders, with thinning gray hair and reading glasses perched low on his nose. He wore a faded plaid shirt and seemed less impressed by technology than by the cinnamon roll on the plate beside him. Celeste showed him Sawyer's photographs of the public road deliveries. Russell dismissed the first truck, then the trailer. At the image of the blue drums, he leaned closer. "Can you enlarge the label?" Sawyer did. The lettering was blurred, but a partial transport code remained visible along one side. Russell stopped chewing. That prefix belonged to Northline Livestock Formulations. Celeste made a note. Current status? License suspended 18 months ago. Mislabeling, undeclared additives, falsified batch records. Could the drums be old stock? Could be rain barrels painted blue. Russell pushed his glasses higher. A code is not contents. Sawyer almost smiled. Elodie had apparently recruited another person committed to disappointing him with accuracy. Russell pointed toward the screen. But if you see that prefix again, get a clearer image from wherever you are legally allowed to stand. Don't touch anything. Don't trespass. And don't decide what's inside based on my memory. The call ended with no breakthrough, only another piece that failed to settle into place. That night, a heavy truck traveled along the county road shortly after 1. Sawyer woke before the headlights crossed his curtains. Vesper was already standing. She ran to the front door, then turned sharply and moved in front of the sleeping puppies. Her head lowered. One front paw shifted ahead of the other. Her entire body became a barrier. The truck slowed near the junction. Its engine idled in the distance. Vesper began to shake. Not the faint muscular tremor Elodie had documented. This was different. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing shortened. She did not retreat from the sound. She placed herself closer to the door. Sawyer did not touch her. He sat on the floor several feet away and listened as the engine accelerated toward the ridge. Only after the noise disappeared did Vesper's posture loosen. She remained standing between the puppies and the road. Sawyer looked at the door. Vesper could not describe a warehouse, a feed label, or the hands that had controlled her life. She could not testify to intent. She could not tell him whether clenbuterol had entered her body through neglect, design, or accident. But when the truck passed, her body remembered before the house did. Sawyer reached for the notebook on the table. He wrote down the time, nothing more. By the end of the second week, Vesper had begun to move through the cabin as though the floor belonged partly to her. She no longer rose every time Sawyer crossed the room. She ate before the puppies had finished licking their bowls clean, and the tremors had become less frequent. Her injured paw was still wrapped, but she could manage short walks along the cleared path behind the cabin. That afternoon, Sawyer took her as far as the frozen edge of the birch line. The sunlight was sharp enough to turn the snow blue beneath the trees. Vesper walked with her head low, pausing often to test the air. Mica followed every one of her footprints. Bramble attempted to climb a snowbank taller than himself and rolled backward into Pipkin, who responded with an offended bark far larger than his body. Sawyer almost laughed. The sound rose halfway through his chest and stopped there, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Then, metal struck metal somewhere across the valley. A hard, distant clang. Vesper dropped instantly. Her belly touched the snow. Her ears flattened. One front paw lifted as if the ground itself had become unsafe. The puppies froze behind her. Sawyer did not reach for her. He crouched several feet away and waited until the echo died. "You're here," he said. Vesper's eyes remained fixed toward the southeast. A second sound followed. Not metal this time, but the long, rising cry of the volunteer fire siren. It rolled over White Cedar Valley in one mournful sweep. Sawyer stood. Beyond the far ridge, a dark column of smoke climbed into the winter sky. The telephone was ringing when he reached the cabin. Mara Kestrel did not waste time on greetings. Fire at Sloan Crest, old feed storage and part of the south barn. Sawyer looked through the window. The smoke was already widening. "What do you need?" "Your portable generator and the hydraulic cutter you use on boat frames. Fire crew's secondary unit won't start." "I'll bring both." "You bring the equipment to the staging point," Mara said. "You do not enter a structure unless Chief Harlan tells you to. You do not investigate. You do not use this fire as permission to wander." "I heard you the first time." "I'm saying it twice because I know you." Sawyer glanced at Vesper. The dog stood at the door, body rigid. "I'll leave the dogs." Vesper scratched once at the lower panel. He looked at her. "No." She scratched again, not frantically, deliberately. Sawyer considered the smoke, the distance, and the fact that Vesper had spent years on that property. He called Elodie. 10 minutes later, the veterinarian's truck stopped in front of the cabin. Elodie stepped out wearing a dark parka over her work clothes, medical bag already in hand. "I'll take the puppies to the clinic," she said. "Vesper can ride with you if she stays secured in the rear crate. She reacts badly to engines. She reacts worse to being separated from all 3 puppies. We'll place the crate where she can see them until we split at the county road." It was not ideal. Neither was leaving a dog who knew the farm behind while part of it burned. They loaded the puppies into Elodie's truck. Pipkin protested. Bramble tried to eat the edge of the blanket. Mica sat upright and watched the smoke. Vesper entered Sawyer's rear crate after a long hesitation. He fastened it securely and left the side panel open enough for her to see him through the truck window. At the county road, Elodie turned toward the clinic. Vesper watched the puppies disappear. A low whine left her throat. Sawyer pulled over. For one moment he considered abandoning the entire plan and following Elodie. Then the fire siren sounded again. Vesper turned toward the smoke. Her body leaned forward inside the crate. Sawyer put the truck back in gear. The south side of Sloane Crest looked nothing like the controlled estate Merrick had presented from the porch of Sawyer's cabin. Smoke rolled across the fields in gray sheets. Cattle pressed against fences, bawling in confusion while workers struggled to move them toward open pasture. A section of the feed warehouse burned with a deep orange glow, flames crawling beneath the roofline toward the attached barn. Volunteer engines stood near the east access road. Hoses cut black lines across the snow. Mara directed traffic beside the staging area, her chestnut hair hidden beneath a knit cap. She pointed Sawyer toward a row of utility vehicles. "Generator there. Cutter to engine 2. Sawyer obeyed. Chief Harland, a broad man with frost in his beard and soot already blackening one side of his face, inspected the hydraulic cutter. "You know how to run it?" "Yes." "You take orders?" "Usually." Harland looked at Mara. "Is that true?" "No," she said. "But he understands consequences." "That'll do." Sawyer helped connect the cutter to the portable generator. The engine caught on the second pull, shaking beneath his hands. From the truck came a sharp bark. Vesper stood inside the crate, staring toward the western wall of the warehouse. Not at the flames. Lower, near the foundation. Sawyer followed her line of sight. A rectangular ventilation opening sat close to the ground, partly hidden by snow and drifting smoke. Vesper barked again, louder this time, then struck the crate door with one paw. A farm worker nearby turned. He was young, face pale beneath a soot-streaked cap. "What is it?" Sawyer asked. The worker looked toward the vent. "Owen, check that side." "Who's Owen?" "Dillard, barn manager." "Is he out?" The worker's expression changed. He looked toward a group of men near the cattle gate, then back at the warehouse. "I thought he was." Mara heard the exchange. She radioed the accountability officer. The answer came after several seconds. Owen Dillard had not checked in. Chief Harland approached. "Last known location?" "Records room," the worker said. "West storage corridor." "Main access?" "Blocked by the collapsed shelving." Vesper barked again toward the low vent. Sawyer pointed. "She knows that building." Harland looked at the dog, then at the ventilation opening. "How large?" "Maybe 18 inches high," the worker said. "Runs under the western office wall. It was part of the old cooling system before the renovation." "Where does it open inside?" "Near the archive room." Harland made the decision quickly. "Cut the exterior grate. We'll push a camera through first." Sawyer carried the hydraulic cutter toward the wall with 2 firefighters beside him. The heat thickened as they approached. Smoke dragged low across the snow, turning daylight brown. He waited until Harland gave the signal. Then he set the jaws against the rusted grate. The metal resisted. The cutter shuddered through his arms. Behind him, Vesper barked from the truck. One bar snapped, then another. The firefighters pulled the grate free and fed a thermal camera into the opening. For several seconds, the monitor showed only smoke and dark structural lines. Then a pale shape appeared near the far wall, human-sized, not moving. "There," Sawyer said. Harland was already issuing orders. The vent was too narrow for a firefighter in full gear, but it gave them the location. A second team attacked the interior wall from an adjoining equipment bay, while Sawyer used the cutter on a warped steel access door. This time, no one asked whether he was willing to go inside. No one needed to. He stayed where Harland placed him, forcing the damaged frame apart while trained firefighters entered through the opening. Every instinct in Sawyer told him to follow. His muscles remembered the shape of narrow corridors, bad air, limited time. His mind supplied distances and risks before anyone spoke them. But this was not his operation. Harland's people knew the structure, the fire, the equipment, and one another. Sawyer held the door. He did not cross it. A firefighter emerged first, moving backward. Another followed, supporting the shoulders of a heavy man in a brown canvas coat. Owen Dillard's body hung loose between them. His sandy gray hair was blackened with soot. One side of his broad face had gone dark red from heat, and a brick-colored scarf remained knotted around his neck. They lowered him onto a stretcher. "He's breathing!" someone shouted. The sentence changed the air around Sawyer. Vesper stopped barking. Owen was carried toward the ambulance. Sawyer stepped back from the access door while the fire crew returned to the warehouse. Only then did he realize his left hand was gripping the scratched dive watch. He released it. The worst of the fire was contained before dusk. The old storage section was badly damaged, but the barn remained standing. Most of the cattle had been moved to the north field. Sawyer was coiling power cable when Elodie arrived from the clinic. "The puppies are stable," she said before he could ask. "Mica has learned to open the lower cabinet in my exam room." "That sounds like her." "Bramble ate a tongue depressor." "That also sounds like him." "Pipkin is asleep in my boot." Sawyer nodded toward the ambulance. "They found the manager." Elodie's attention shifted. Owen had regained consciousness but remained on oxygen. He sat propped against the ambulance wall, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket. Mara stood beside him, taking an initial statement. Vesper remained in Sawyer's truck, quieter now. When Owen turned his head, he saw her. His entire face changed. "Vesper." The name came out rough beneath the oxygen mask. The dog stood. Owen pulled the mask aside. "Vesper," he said again. "Girl, is that you?" Vesper did not bark. She stared at him. Mara looked at Sawyer, then at Elodie. "Can she come closer?" Elodie studied Owen's condition and the space around the ambulance. "On leash. No sudden contact." Sawyer opened the crate and clipped on Vesper's lead. She stepped down slowly. Her injured paw touched the snow with care, but she walked directly toward the ambulance. Owen began to cry before she reached him. The tears cut clean lines through the soot on his face. "My wife named her," he said. "Celia trained her, herding, tracking, finding downed cattle. Vesper could work a field better than 3 men." The dog stopped several feet away. Owen held out one cracked hand. Vesper did not approach it. Sawyer kept the leash loose. "What happened to her?" Elodie asked. Owen lowered his hand. "Celia died 18 months ago. Cancer." His fingers found the bent little finger on his left hand and rubbed the crooked joint. "Merrick said Vesper belonged to the company because the training was done on farm time." "And the puppies?" Mara asked. "Born in the auxiliary kennel. Not supposed to happen. Merrick planned to sell them once they were old enough." Vesper's ears shifted at Merrick's name. Owen looked at her bandaged paw. "I fed her when I could, left scraps behind the old storage bins." "When you could?" Elodie's voice sharpened. "She was nursing 3 puppies." Owen flinched. "Merrick moved her beside the feed warehouse after Celia died, said a hungry dog guarded harder." Silence settled around the ambulance. Even the fire seemed farther away. Sawyer looked at Vesper. The dog stood motionless, her chest rising and falling. Owen continued, "I should have taken her." "Yes," Elodie said. There was no softness in it. Owen closed his eyes. "He owns the house I live in. Held back part of my retirement. Said if I crossed him, he'd tell the state the feed records were mine." "What records?" Mara asked. Owen looked toward the smoking warehouse. "The unmarked powder came in blue drums. We mixed it into the final feed batches." Sawyer felt the pieces shift, but Mara lifted a hand before he spoke. "Do you know what was in it?" "No," Did Merrick tell you? No. Called it an efficiency supplement. What caused the fire? Owen swallowed. 2 days ago, he ordered the drums moved into the old warehouse. Said inspectors were asking questions. One of the newer hands spilled solvent near the propane heater. I told them to shut the area down. But you went back inside, Mara said. Owen looked at the burned building. My notebook was in the archive room. What notebook? Dates, batch numbers, deliveries. I started keeping it after the first cattle got sick. Elodie stared at him. You knew animals were getting sick. I knew something was wrong. And you kept mixing it. Owen's face folded inward. Yes. The word was barely audible. Vesper took 1 step forward. Owen looked up. She did not wag her tail. She did not place her head in his hand or offer the easy absolution he clearly wanted. She stood in front of him and watched. Owen's hand trembled above his knee. She found me, he whispered. She helped us find the right wall, Sawyer said. The fire crew brought you out. Owen nodded slowly. Vesper remained still. A dog's memory was not a court, and survival was not forgiveness. Owen seemed to understand. He put the oxygen mask back over his face. Mara closed her notebook. When you're medically cleared, we're going to speak again. Everything. No omissions. Owen nodded. Vesper turned away from him. She walked back to Sawyer without pulling on the lead. At the truck, she paused and looked once toward the smoke, then toward the road where Elodie's vehicle waited to take her back to the puppies. Sawyer opened the crate. Vesper climbed inside. Behind them, Owen Dillard sat wrapped in silver foil beneath the fading winter light, alive because the dog he had failed had remembered where to look. That was not mercy, not yet. It was only time, and time, Sawyer knew, could become either an excuse or a final chance. The first official evidence meeting took place 6 days after the fire. Celeste Arbor chose the County Emergency Services conference room rather than the sheriff's office. The room had no portraits on the walls, no polished wood, and no sense of ceremony. It held a long folding table, a coffee machine that sounded as though it was grinding gravel, and a whiteboard scarred by years of storm maps and evacuation routes. Sawyer sat at one end of the table. He disliked meetings where nothing moved except paper. Across from him, Owen Dillard kept both hands wrapped around a paper cup. The burns along one side of his face were healing beneath a thin layer of ointment. His brick-red scarf was gone, replaced by a hospital-issued gray sweatshirt beneath his old canvas coat. The crooked little finger on his left hand moved constantly against the cup's rim. Mara sat beside him, her red notebook open. Celeste stood at the whiteboard. Her dark hair was braided low behind her neck, and a gray field vest covered a navy shirt. She had arranged the evidence in columns, not conclusions. Animal exposure, feed records, transport, storage, environmental, witnesses. Sawyer studied the empty spaces beneath each heading. It looked less like a case than the beginning of one. Celeste placed a sealed plastic bag on the table. Inside was Owen's notebook. The cover had been blackened by smoke, and the lower corner had curled from heat. Several pages were water-stained from the fire hoses. The fire marshal had recovered it from a metal drawer in the records room after the structure was declared safe. You understand that handing this over does not remove your own exposure, Celeste told Owen. He nodded. You participated in mixing unidentified additives into livestock feed. Yes. You failed to report animals showing adverse symptoms. Yes. You also remained silent about conditions involving Vesper and her puppies. Owen looked down. Yes. Celeste did not soften the questions, but neither did she sharpen them for effect. Why are you cooperating now? Owen rubbed his bent finger. Because I ran out of excuses. Mara's pen paused. Sawyer looked at him. Owen had not said he was frightened. He had not mentioned the house Merrick controlled or the withheld retirement funds. Those things were true, but he seemed to understand that true reasons could still become dishonest shields. Celeste opened the evidence bag with gloved hands and turned several pages. The notebook contained dates, initials, delivery times, feedlot numbers, and short remarks written in Owen's heavy block lettering. Cattle 4258, shaking after night mix, calf 17 down, fast heart. MS said reduce water, continue powder. Blue Drum Lot, NLF 72. You wrote MS, Celeste said. Merrick Sloan. Did he personally instruct you to continue using the powder? Twice in person, other times through Foreman. Any recordings? No. Messages? Some. Old phone. Merrick's people collected company devices after the fire. Celeste made a note. Your notebook supports a pattern. It does not identify the substance. I know. It also contains your handwriting, not Mr. Sloan's. I know that too. Sawyer heard the weariness in Owen's voice. The man had apparently imagined confession as a door. Celeste was showing him that it was only a corridor. That was how real accountability worked, Sawyer thought. No single statement purified anyone. The door opened, and Mara stepped into the hallway. When she returned, a woman followed her into the room carrying a rigid black document case against her chest. Lydia Voss was 51 and dressed as though she had come directly from an accounting office that had never fully accepted winter. A camel-colored coat hung over a dark wool dress. Her chestnut hair was pinned into a smooth knot, but several strands had escaped near her temples. She wore thin, gold-framed glasses and held herself very straight, the posture of someone trying to keep panic from becoming visible. This is Lydia Voss, Mara said, part-time accounts manager for Sloan Crest. Lydia's eyes went first to Owen, then to Sawyer. I was told this was confidential. It is an investigative interview, Celeste said, within the limits of law and evidence handling. Lydia remained near the door. My son works in the North Cattle Division. Celeste pulled out a chair. Sit down, Ms. Voss. I don't know anything about chemicals. I didn't ask whether you did. Lydia sat but kept the document case on her lap. For the first 20 minutes, she denied seeing anything unusual. Sloan Crest used multiple suppliers. Agricultural businesses often divided purchases among subsidiaries. Emergency purchases sometimes arrived without complete documentation. Merrick delegated many payments. Lydia processed what appeared in the system. Celeste listened without interrupting. Sawyer watched Lydia's hands. Each time she said the records were normal, her fingers tightened on the handle of the case. Mara asked about a company called Harrow Vale Nutritional Services. Lydia's answer came half a second too late. A regional supplier. Where are they based? I'd have to check. Do they have a tax identification number? I assume so. You processed 11 payments to them. Lydia's throat moved. They were approved. By whom? The executive office. Merrick Sloan? I don't remember. Celeste leaned back. No one here is asking you to accuse your employer. We are asking you to identify records. Lydia looked toward the closed door. My son rents a house from Sloan Crest. Owen closed his eyes. The sentence explained more than her earlier answers had. Celeste kept her voice level. If your testimony is truthful, we can discuss witness protections and employment concerns. I cannot promise there will be no consequences. I can promise that lying now will make your position worse. Lydia's face tightened. For a long moment, she held the black case as though it contained something alive. Then she placed it on the table. The clasps opened with 2 small clicks. Inside were duplicate invoices, printed ledger extracts, and handwritten reconciliation notes. I started copying them 8 months ago, she said. No one spoke. Lydia removed the first stack. Harrow Vale Nutritional Services does not exist. Mara leaned forward. How do you know? The address belongs to an abandoned farm equipment warehouse outside Grayling. The phone number routes through a prepaid service. The tax field in our system uses a number assigned to a dissolved landscaping company. Why were the payments not flagged? They were divided. Lydia slid a ledger page across the table. The amounts were consistently below the threshold requiring secondary review. 4,800, 4,600, 4,950, never 5,000. Owen looked at the page. Celeste asked, Who instructed you to split them? Lydia's mouth tightened. Merrick. The room changed, not dramatically. No one gasped. The coffee machine continued its mechanical grumbling in the corner, but one empty column on the whiteboard had acquired weight. Lydia removed another set of invoices. The descriptions changed: mineral supplement, veterinary electrolyte, winter feed stabilizer, but the shipping references repeated. Sawyer recognized one of the prefixes, NLF. Russell Keene joined the meeting by video call an hour later. His face appeared on a monitor at the end of the room, reading glasses low on his nose and a mug large enough to qualify as cookware beside him. He examined the scanned invoices one by one. "That batch prefix belongs to Northline Livestock Formulations," he said. "The suspended distributor?" Mara asked. "Former distributor. License pulled after undeclared beta agonists were found in 2 feed products." Celeste said, "Does this prove the Sloan shipments contained clenbuterol?" "No." Lydia stared at the screen. Russell continued, "It proves someone used Northline's numbering structure. Could be old inventory. Could be counterfeit goods. Could be drums reused by another supplier. Financial fraud and illegal feed additives are related possibilities, not the same fact." Sawyer leaned back. Every new piece seemed to open 2 more gaps. Russell lifted one invoice toward his camera. "This lot suffix is interesting, though. Northline used a 2-letter plant code. BV belonged to the Bayview blending facility." "That site closed 2 years ago," Celeste said. "Exactly. So the invoice dates are impossible." "The dates are impossible if the documents are genuine." Lydia's voice was quiet. "They aren't." Russell looked toward her image on the shared screen. "Then whoever made them knew enough to imitate the old system, but not enough to update it. The finding did not prove what had entered the cattle feed. It proved someone had gone to considerable trouble to hide where something came from. That distinction mattered. Sawyer could feel the old part of himself pushing ahead, assembling roots, names, motive, opportunity. He wanted the shape completed. He wanted a target clear enough to act against. Celeste capped her pen. "We now have grounds to expand records requests and interview additional staff. We do not yet have grounds to announce that Sloan Crest used clenbuterol." Sawyer looked at the whiteboard. "What about the notebook? Supports unidentified feed additives and livestock symptoms. The invoices? Support false vendors and concealed payments. Vesper's test? Supports exposure. The fire report? Supports improper storage and relocation of unmarked materials. They all point the same way." "They point," Celeste said. "They do not arrive." The frustration rose before Sawyer could stop it. How many animals have to get sick while everyone waits for perfect language? Owen lowered his cup. Lydia went very still. Celeste met Sawyer's eyes. Enough cases fail because someone wanted the truth faster than the law could carry it. This isn't theoretical. No, which is why I won't let impatience destroy it. The word struck the room harder than a raised voice. Sawyer felt his thumb press against the damaged edge of his watch. For years, speed had meant survival. Delay gave danger time to move. Hesitation created casualties. But here, one careless step could give Merrick's attorneys a reason to exclude records, challenge samples, or portray frightened witnesses as people coached by a hostile former soldier. Sawyer stood. "I need air." Celeste did not stop him. Outside, afternoon light spread flat and silver across the parking lot. Snowplows had pushed the old drifts into gray walls along the road. Sawyer walked to his truck but did not get in. Vesper sat behind the windshield. He had brought her because Elodie wanted to recheck her after the meeting. The puppies were at the clinic, likely reorganizing its lower cabinets. Vesper watched him approach. Sawyer opened the passenger door. She remained seated on the blanket, wearing the temporary brown leather collar he had made from an old harness strap. The copper tag was not yet engraved. "You're the only witness who can't be pressured," he said. Vesper tilted her head. "And the only one who can't testify." He rested both hands on the open doorframe. A week earlier, that fact would have angered him differently. He might have treated Vesper's fear as a command, her injuries as permission. Now he understood that using her suffering to justify his own certainty would be another way of taking something from her. Vesper rose and placed one paw on the edge of the seat, not reaching for him, simply waiting. Sawyer exhaled. "I know." When he returned to the conference room, Lydia was crying silently. June Belrose sat beside her. Sawyer had not heard June arrive. The 68-year-old diner owner wore a cream cardigan beneath her winter coat. her silver curls still carrying the warmth of the kitchen. Red-framed glasses hung against her chest, and the handle of her old wooden soup ladle protruded from a canvas bag at her side. She had brought sandwiches. June's answer to institutional tension was apparently sliced roast beef. "Lydia won't be returning to Sloane Crest today," June said. "She's staying with me." Lydia wiped her face. "My son won't leave the farm." "He's 32, June replied. "That is old enough to make one bad decision without requiring his mother to join him." Lydia looked wounded. June pushed a sandwich toward her. "Eat before you become dramatic on an empty stomach. It makes poor drama." Mara almost smiled. June turned to Celeste. "The back room at Belrose Diner has a separate entrance. Workers can come through the alley. No windows facing Main Street." "You're offering it for interviews?" Celeste asked. "I'm offering coffee and privacy. You handle the interviews." June looked around the table. "Half this valley owes Merrick money. The other half is afraid of losing business if the county gets a reputation for poisoned cattle." "No one has established poisoned cattle," Celeste said. June nodded. "Good. Then we won't say that." Her restraint surprised Sawyer. June was not calling for rebellion. She was creating a room in which fear had less authority. Over the next 10 days, that room filled slowly. A night feeder described cattle trembling after certain batches were mixed. A truck mechanic reported being ordered to remove farm markings before 2 late deliveries. A livestock handler recalled 3 animals with racing hearts and excessive sweating, followed by instructions to move them away before the contract veterinarian arrived. None of the witnesses knew the entire scheme. Some contradicted one another on times and quantities. One withdrew his statement the next morning. Another refused to be recorded. The truth did not arrive as a clean confession. It arrived in fragments, frightened and imperfect. Environmental officers collected water samples from the public creek below Sloane Crest. Early screening found chemical residues requiring further analysis, but Celeste refused to identify them before confirmation. Merrick responded publicly. At a Livestock Association meeting, he described the investigation as an attack on white cedar agriculture. He said an unstable former serviceman had become obsessed with stealing a valuable breeding dog and was manipulating public officials. The statement traveled faster than the evidence. 2 repair clients canceled work with Sawyer. Someone left a note on his workshop door telling him to stop trying to destroy the valley. He folded the note and gave it to Mara. He did not answer it. One evening, as another worker entered June's back room through the alley, Sawyer remained across the diner in a front booth. He had been asked not to participate in the interview. Through the frosted glass, he could see only shapes moving behind the partition. Celeste sprayed, Mara's notebook, June passing coffee. Sawyer sat with both hands around a mug he had not touched. Every instinct told him he should be in that room. Instead, he stayed where he had been placed. Vesper lay beneath the table, her body relaxed, the puppies sleeping in a blanket-lined crate beside the booth. Bramble's paw protruded between the bars. Mica had positioned herself against the door latch. Pipkin snored softly beneath both of them. Sawyer listened to voices he could not make out. For once, not knowing everything did not feel like failure. It felt like trust. When Celeste finally emerged, she placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Another statement," she said. "Useful? Potentially. Enough? Not yet." Sawyer nodded. Celeste studied him. "You're learning. Don't sound so surprised." "I'm an investigator. Surprise is an admission of poor preparation," June called from behind the counter. "She practices those lines in the mirror." Celeste ignored her. Outside, evening snow began to fall in thin, slow flakes. The valley had not chosen a side. Some people believed Merrick. Some feared him. Some feared the investigation more. But one witness had become 3. 3 had become 6. And none of them, alone, carried enough truth to change anything. Together, they were beginning to form something harder to silence. The first warning came from Lydia Voss at 4:17 in the afternoon. Mara answered on the second ring. By then, dusk had begun to settle over White Cedar Valley, turning the snowfields blue and the tree line black. The temperature had dropped 12 degrees since noon and was still falling. Lydia's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're moving cattle tonight." Mara stood in the back office of Belrose Diner with Celeste beside her and June closing the door against the noise of the kitchen. "How many?" Mara asked. "At least 4 trailers, maybe 6. Destination? The manifests say Wisconsin. And the actual destination? I don't know. The records were changed after lunch." Celeste took the telephone. What was changed? Animal identification numbers, weight records, health certificates. Lydia drew a shaking breath. Some of the cattle listed for transport were marked as isolated last week. For what reason? Rapid heart rate, tremors. 2 collapsed after feeding. Celeste's expression hardened. When are the trucks leaving? They may already be loading. Who authorized the changes? Lydia was silent for 1 second too long. Merrick. The line went dead. Celeste lowered the phone. Mara was already reaching for her radio. The investigation had moved slowly for weeks, built from interviews, financial records, laboratory requests, and careful distinctions between suspicion and proof. Celeste had spent that morning finalizing an application for an administrative inspection of the feed storage areas and livestock records. Now Merrick was moving the animals before that inspection could occur, but a fraudulent manifest was not merely suspicious, it was actionable. Within 20 minutes, 2 county units and a state agricultural enforcement vehicle were positioned along the public highway north of Sloan Crest. The road narrowed there between a frozen creek and a steep embankment, leaving no easy place for a livestock convoy to turn around. Sawyer learned about the operation only when Mara called him. "Stay home," she said. He stood in the cabin doorway, watching Vesper supervise the puppies in the yard. "What happened?" "Possible unlawful transport. We're handling it." "You called to tell me not to come?" "I called because the valley has a talent for turning rumor into emergency. If you hear trucks, sirens, or angry men, you remain where you are." "I understand." There was a pause. Mara knew his answer had come too easily. "Sawyer, I said I understand." He ended the call before she could repeat herself. For the next hour, he repaired a cracked sled runner in the workshop. He measured the same section of wood 3 times. Outside, Vesper walked the fence line with Mica following close behind. Bramble and Pipkin fought over a pine cone with the seriousness of 2 nations disputing a border. The distant sound of diesel engines carried through the valley shortly before 6. Vesper stopped. Sawyer looked toward the northern road. He did not reach for his coat. This was not his operation. That knowledge did not make staying still easier. On the highway, the first cattle trailer came around the bend at 6:08. Mara's patrol vehicle blocked 1 lane. A state enforcement truck occupied the other. Portable lights threw a hard white glare across the snow. The driver braked late. Cattle shifted inside the trailer, hooves striking metal. Mara approached from the side, one hand raised. "Engine off. Keys on the dashboard." The driver obeyed. The second and third trailers stopped behind him. A fourth remained farther back near the ridge. Celeste checked the first manifest beneath the portable lights. The livestock identification numbers did not match the tags visible through the trailer vents. The veterinary certificate carried the name of a veterinarian who had retired 8 months earlier. She turned to the driver. "Who gave you these documents?" The man stared at the steering wheel. "Sloan office." "Who specifically?" "I don't know." Mara looked toward the second vehicle. "You loaded cattle without verifying the paperwork?" "I drive what they tell me to drive." The fourth truck suddenly reversed. Its engine roared. A state officer moved his vehicle to block the shoulder before the trailer could attempt a turn. Then a black SUV appeared behind the convoy. Merrick Sloan stepped out before it had fully stopped. He wore his midnight blue coat and black gloves, his silver hair neat despite the wind. The signet ring on his right hand flashed as he pointed toward the roadblock. "You have no authority to detain my property." Celeste walked toward him carrying the manifest. "We have authority to inspect interstate livestock documents on a public highway. These cattle are healthy and legally transferred. The identification numbers do not match." "A clerical issue. The health certificate was signed by a veterinarian who is no longer practicing." Merrick's jaw tightened. "Then call my office." "We have." "And?" No one answered. He looked at the drivers. "Move the trucks." No one moved. Merrick's voice sharpened. "I said move them." The first driver kept both hands visible on the dashboard. Merrick walked toward the cab. "If you sit there, you're finished. Every one of you." Mara stepped between him and the truck. "Back away. This is private business. You're threatening witnesses during an active enforcement stop. They work for me. Not at this moment." For the first time, Merrick's polished expression fractured. He turned toward the driver again. "Start the engine." The driver shook his head. It was a small movement, but it changed the balance of the road. Merrick saw it. So did everyone else. The man had depended on Merrick for work, housing, and perhaps much more. Yet in the harsh white glare of the temporary lights, he chose not to turn the key. Merrick reached for the cab door. Mara caught his wrist before he touched it. "Mr. Sloan, you are being detained for interference with an enforcement action." His eyes moved to her hand, then to Celeste. "You think this holds?" Celeste folded the false certificate. "I think it holds long enough to ask better questions." Merrick pulled away, but two deputies were already beside him. No one cheered when they placed him in the patrol vehicle. The drivers simply watched. Silence had changed employers. At 7:03, a second emergency began. The fire-damaged heating system in Sloan Crest's main cattle barn failed. An electrical fault shut down the remaining ventilation fans and two radiant heaters. With the outdoor temperature sinking below zero, condensation began freezing along the interior walls. Several hundred cattle remained in pens vulnerable to the cold. Owen Dillard was the first to understand the scale of the danger. He called Mara from June's diner, where he had been staying after being discharged from the hospital. "The south barn can't hold heat," he said, "not with the damaged ductwork." "Backup power?" "One generator, maybe two. Not enough for the entire building." "How long?" "In this cold? A few hours before the weakest animals start going down." Celeste looked toward the stopped trailers. Those animals could not legally leave. The cattle still at Sloan Crest could not safely remain in the damaged barn. The enforcement action had prevented one danger and exposed another. Mara called Sawyer again. This time she did not tell him to stay home. "We need the generator," she said, "and we need someone who can organize equipment without turning the yard into chaos." Sawyer was already pulling on his parka. "Who has command?" "Fire chief manages safety. Elodie manages animal condition. Owen manages barn layout. Celeste manages evidence areas." "And me?" "You make sure each of them gets what they need." Sawyer paused. It was not command. It was coordination. "I'm on my way." He left Mica, Bramble, and Pipkin in the secured cabin room with food and heat. Vesper stood at the truck before he opened the rear door. Sawyer hesitated. "You stay with me." Vesper climbed into the crate. By 8, Sloan Crest had become a place of competing urgencies. Portable lights illuminated clouds of breath rising from cattle and people alike. Fire crews ran electrical lines toward the north barn. Farmers arrived with generators, straw, portable fencing, and stock trailers. Not all of them came openly. One generator appeared behind the equipment shed with no owner nearby. A pallet of blankets arrived with the supplier's name covered by tape. Two ranch hands volunteered only after dark, keeping their faces turned from the news camera parked near the road. Others did not come at all. Some believed the accusations against Merrick were exaggerated. Some feared that helping would make them targets. Some considered the cattle the responsibility of the man who owned them. June Belrose arrived carrying 4 metal soup urns and enough sandwiches to feed a small regiment. She climbed onto the running board of a pickup and addressed 3 hesitant farmers standing near the gate. "You are not saving Merrick Sloan," she told them. "You are saving animals that cannot read a balance sheet or hire a lawyer." One farmer looked toward the barn. "If the state shuts this place down, those cattle could ruin every market in the county. And if they freeze tonight, what do you imagine that will do?" He said nothing. June handed him a pair of work gloves. "Argue after sunrise." He took them. Sawyer set up a staging board on the hood of an old farm truck. He assigned nothing by rank. Chief Harlan decided which sections were structurally safe. Elodie identified the animals most vulnerable to cold stress. Owen mapped the gates, holding pens, and backup alleys. Celeste marked which feed rooms and records areas could not be disturbed. Sawyer connected the spaces between their decisions. "We moved the calves first," Elodie said. Owen pointed toward a narrow western lane. "That passage is partially blocked. Can it be cleared?" "With 2 people and a loader." Sawyer looked toward a farmer standing beside a compact tractor. "You know that machine?" "Better than my wife." June, passing with soup, called over her shoulder, "That explains the divorce." The farmer stared at her, then laughed despite himself. 10 minutes later, the lane was open. The cattle moved reluctantly through the cold, their hooves slipping on packed snow. Owen worked near the front with a sorting stick held low, using his voice more than force. Vesper walked on a long lead beside Sawyer. At first, she stayed close to his leg. Then Owen called an old command, "Easy left, girl." Vesper's ears lifted. For a moment she looked at him without moving. Owen did not repeat the command. He lowered the sorting stick and waited. Vesper stepped forward. She moved along the edge of a small group of cattle, never rushing them, using position and steady pressure to turn them toward the cleared lane. The work seemed to return through her body before it returned to her trust. Owen followed several yards behind. He did not praise her. He had not earned that familiarity. But when the final cow passed through the gate, his face held something deeper than relief. Near midnight, a calf panicked at a fallen section of railing. The young animal backed sideways and caught one rear leg beneath the bent metal. Its struggles drove the rail tighter against the joint. "Stop moving it!" Elodie shouted. People stepped back. The calf thrashed once more, then Vesper slipped forward and lay down in the snow beside its head. She did not bark or touch the trapped leg. She simply stayed low, breathing steadily, her body within the calf's field of vision. The calf's movements slowed. Sawyer and Owen knelt beside the rail. "We lift together," Sawyer said. Owen gripped the bent section. His damaged hand slipped. Vesper remained beside the calf. Owen looked at her. The dog he had failed was still doing the work she had once been trained to do, not for him and not because the past had been repaired, but because another frightened animal needed calm. Owen reset his grip. "Ready." They lifted. Elodie pulled the calf's leg free and checked the joint. "No fracture," she said. "Get it inside." Owen stayed on his knees after the animal stood. Vesper rose. She looked at him once, then followed Sawyer. Owen bowed his head. Nothing had been forgiven. Yet he had finally stopped asking forgiveness to do the work of responsibility. By 4 in the morning, the last vulnerable group had been transferred to the heated north barn and temporary shelters. Portable generators kept the ventilation running. Elodie and 2 regional veterinarians began checking cattle for cold stress and abnormal heart rates. The valley had not become united. It had become less silent. A ranch hand asked Mara how to give a formal statement. Then a truck mechanic did the same. One driver from the blocked convoy handed Celeste his phone and said there were messages she needed to see. Fear did not vanish all at once. It changed sides one person at a time. Merrick watched some of it from the rear seat of the patrol vehicle before being transported to the county detention center. He saw workers following Owen's directions. He saw neighboring farmers lending equipment. He saw June handing coffee to men who had refused to speak publicly only days before. None of them looked toward him for permission. His power had not been taken by Sawyer, Mara, or Celeste. It had been withdrawn by the people who had once supplied it. The laboratory confirmations arrived over the following days. Multiple sealed feed samples tested positive for clenbuterol. Water taken downstream from Sloan Crest contained related chemical residues above permitted levels. Investigators also confirmed falsified transportation documents, concealed payments, improper chemical storage, and records linking Merrick's office to the altered manifests. Additional charges followed: use of prohibited feed additives, environmental violations, falsification of business and livestock records, animal cruelty, witness intimidation, obstruction of an investigation. The charges were not a verdict. Merrick retained attorneys. Motions would be filed. Experts would argue over samples, handling, intent, and responsibility. The process might take months or longer, but a court approved the temporary transfer of Sloan Crest's operations to an independent agricultural management team. Veterinarians assumed supervision of the cattle. Workers were allowed to remain employed while investigators separated individual responsibility from Merrick's orders. On the first morning under new management, Sawyer stood outside the north barn as sunlight spread over the snow. Vesper sat beside him. Inside, cattle shifted through clean straw. Generators hummed. Workers moved without looking over their shoulders. Owen approached but stopped several feet away. "They're asking me to stay on temporarily," he said. "Show the management team how the systems work." Sawyer looked at him. "You going to?" "Yes." "Why?" Owen watched Vesper. "To tell the truth before someone has to drag it out of me." Vesper rose. She did not go to Owen. She turned toward the open field where the morning light had begun to turn the white ground gold. Sawyer followed her gaze. The valley looked much as it always had. Barns, fences, smoke rising from chimneys, snow along the roads. Nothing in the landscape announced that fear had lost some of its authority. But inside the barn, people spoke in ordinary voices, and no one lowered them when a black vehicle passed on the highway. By the time the snow began to loosen from the lower branches, the cabin had stopped looking temporary. The blankets near the stove had been replaced by 4 proper beds. Sawyer had built them from cedar scraps left over from a damaged skiff, sanding the edges smooth and burning each name into the wood. Vesper, Mica, Bramble, Pipkin. Bramble had already chewed the corner of his. Sawyer stood over the damage with both hands on his hips. The puppy, now much too large to pretend innocence successfully, lay nearby with a curl of cedar shaving attached to his lower lip. "You had a bed," Sawyer said. Bramble thumped his tail. "You still have most of a bed." Mica sat beside the window, watching the exchange with the solemn attention of a magistrate. Her ears now stood fully upright, though one leaned slightly when she was tired. Pipkin had grown faster than anyone expected. I was no longer small enough to fit inside Sawyer's old military boot, but this had not prevented him from trying. Only his front legs and head fit now. The rest of him remained outside on the floor. Sawyer looked down at him. Pipkin closed his eyes as if physical impossibility were a matter best solved through sleep. Across the room, Vesper rested near the stove. Her coat had regained its depth and shine. The black along her back no longer looked dull, and the burned amber on her chest had grown thick enough to hide the sharpness that once showed beneath it. The scar along her left shoulder remained visible when she turned. So did the slight outward lean of her damaged ear. Some marks stayed after the danger was gone. Sawyer understood that. A county vehicle appeared in the drive shortly before 10. Vesper lifted her head but did not rise. That was new. Months earlier, the sound of an engine would have brought her to the door with her body lowered and every muscle drawn tight. Now she listened first. Mara Kestrel stepped from the vehicle carrying a large envelope and her red notebook. Elodie arrived behind her in the veterinary truck, parking close enough that Bramble began barking at the familiar engine before remembering he liked her. Sawyer opened the door. "Official visit?" he asked. Mara held up the envelope. "Official enough to require signatures." Elodie entered without waiting for an invitation. She crouched to greet the puppies and immediately lost one glove to Bramble. "I'm beginning to think theft is his primary working drive," she said. "He's consistent. That will look excellent on his adoption record." Sawyer's expression changed before he could stop it. Mara noticed. "So we should discuss that." They sat at the kitchen table while Vesper remained near the stove. Mara placed the documents between them. The animal welfare review had taken longer than Sawyer expected. There had been veterinary reports, photographs, statements from Owen, records from Sloane Crest, and an assessment of Sawyer's property. The court had temporarily suspended the company's ownership rights while the evidence was reviewed. Now the ruling was final. Mara turned the first page toward him. "Sloane Crest's claim to Vesper and the puppies has been terminated." Sawyer read the sentence twice. The wording was plain. No poetry. No sense of the night they had arrived or the miles Vesper had crossed through snow. Just a legal recognition that they would not be sent back. Elodie watched him over the rim of her coffee mug. "The rescue organization has agreed to transfer permanent custody to an approved adopter." Sawyer looked at her. "Which adopter?" Mara slid the next form forward. "You, assuming you still want them." Bramble dropped Elodie's glove beneath the table. For several seconds, Sawyer heard only the stove and Pipkin's breathing from the boot. He had known this was possible. They had discussed the assessment, fencing, veterinary costs, and long-term care. He had answered questions about emergency plans, income, travel, and whether 4 German shepherds might be more responsibility than one solitary man should reasonably accept. Still, possibility had preserved distance. A signature would not. Sawyer looked toward Vesper. The dog met his eyes. She could not understand custody transfers or permanent placement. She knew rooms, voices, scents, routines, and whether a hand arrived with patience or force. He wondered whether permanence mattered to animals in the way it mattered to people. Perhaps home was never an agreement about the future. Perhaps it was simply the place where fear was not used against you. Sawyer picked up the pen. "I want them." Mara did not smile until after he signed all 4 forms. Elodie did. "You might regret saying that when Bramble learns to open the refrigerator. Mica will learn first." At the window, Mica glanced toward them. The possibility did not appear to trouble her. Mara removed 4 small registration tags from the envelope. The first 3 bore the puppies' names. The 4th was a copper tag engraved with Vesper on one side. On the other side was a single word: home. Sawyer had asked for it weeks earlier and then nearly forgotten. He carried the tag to Vesper and crouched several feet away. He held it where she could inspect it. She sniffed the copper. Sawyer fastened it to the brown leather collar he had made for her. The metal rested against her chest. Vesper looked down briefly at the movement, then lifted her head toward the window, where sunlight had begun to drip from the icicles. Nothing dramatic happened. She did not leap into Sawyer's arms or suddenly become a different dog. She simply lay down again. But this time, she placed one paw across the toe of his boot. Spring came slowly to White Cedar Valley. The days brightened before they warmed. Snow turned to gray banks along the roads, then collapsed into streams that ran beneath fences and across old tractor ruts. The frozen lake remained hard at its center, while dark water appeared near the shore. Some nights, trucks still passed on the county road. Vesper no longer ran to the door every time. But certain engines, deep diesel notes, metal trailers rattling behind them, still brought the old tension into her body. She would rise, place herself between the puppies and the windows, and wait for the sound to fade. Sawyer never told her there was nothing to fear. He had learned that such words often served the comfort of the person speaking them. Instead, he sat nearby. Sometimes he rested his hand on the floor. Sometimes he said nothing. When the engine disappeared, Vesper decided when to lie down. Sawyer's nights did not become peaceful simply because the house was full. The dream returned near the end of March. Red light inside a transport aircraft. A warning spoken twice. A corridor chosen. Then the burst of gunfire and the weight of a body he could not carry fast enough. Sawyer woke on the bedroom floor with one hand gripping the dive watch and breath caught high in his chest. He did not remember leaving the bed. The cabin was dark except for moonlight. Vesper stood in the doorway. She did not hurry toward him. She approached with the same caution he had once used with her on the porch. One step, then another. She lowered her head onto his knee. Sawyer's fingers loosened around the watch. He did not tell her he was fine. She did not ask him to be. They stayed there until his breathing matched hers. Neither one erased the past. They only refused to let the other face it alone. Owen Dillard began working with a licensed organization caring for animals removed from unsafe farms. The work was temporary at first, cleaning pens, repairing gates, and documenting feeding schedules under supervision. Elodie did not praise him for it. When Sawyer asked whether she believed Owen had changed, she considered the question. "I believe he keeps showing up when no one is applauding. Is that enough? It's a beginning." Owen also continued cooperating with investigators. He accepted that his testimony might reduce neither his guilt nor the consequences of his actions. He did not ask Vesper to forgive him again. When he visited the cabin, he stayed several yards from her unless she chose otherwise. Most days, she did not approach. One afternoon, while Owen repaired a loose gate hinge, Vesper lay in the yard where she could watch him. That was all. Sawyer understood the generosity of it. The idea for the barn began during a late snowstorm in April. A county rescue crew brought 2 abandoned hounds to Elodie's clinic after a road closure prevented transport to the regional shelter. Every kennel at the clinic was occupied. Sawyer looked toward his unused woodworking barn. "We can keep them here." Elodie turned slowly. "No. It has heat. It has sawdust, oil, unsecured tools, and no quarantine area. I can fix those. You cannot simply become an animal shelter because you own a roof." "I didn't say shelter." "You were thinking it loudly." Sawyer folded his arms. Elodie pointed at him. "Licensing, sanitation, ventilation, insurance, disease control, emergency exits, waste handling. Anything else?" "Yes. The fact that 4 dogs already treat you as underqualified staff." Bramble chose that moment to run past with a wrench. Sawyer watched him disappear beneath the porch. "Your timing is poor," he called. The barn did not become a rescue center that spring. Instead, Sawyer contacted a licensed county organization. Together, they created a small emergency foster site for winter road closures and short-term crises. Elodie designed the quarantine plan and veterinary protocols. Mara coordinated county referrals. June organized blankets, food, and volunteer schedules from the diner. Russell Keene inspected the ventilation system and declared Sawyer's first design an excellent method for creating pneumonia with craftsmanship. Sawyer rebuilt it. Owen helped install washable wall panels and drainage channels. He worked quietly and never stayed after his task was finished. People brought supplies. Some arrived with names attached. Others appeared on the porch before dawn. Sealed food, old towels, unused medication carriers, metal bowls. The place grew not from a single act of generosity, but from dozens of modest ones. A year passed before the site received its full operating approval. By then, the repaired barn had 6 secure enclosures, a heated intake room, proper ventilation, and a small medical space Elodie insisted was not to be used by Sawyer without permission. A wooden sign hung above the entrance. Vesper House. June complained that Sawyer had made the lettering too small. Russell said the roof pitch was wrong. Mara said the paperwork was finally correct. Elodie checked the isolation room twice and found only 3 problems, which everyone considered a celebration. On the first official morning, sunlight covered the frozen lake in pale gold. Sawyer stood on the cabin porch wearing his faded green camouflage field uniform beneath an olive parka. The old dive watch remained on his wrist. Vesper stood on his left. Mica sat near the steps, alert and composed. Bramble had found a length of rope and was attempting to persuade Pipkin that it belonged to him. Pipkin ignored the argument and pressed both front paws into Sawyer's old boot, still committed to a dream his body had outgrown. An engine approached through the trees, not a heavy livestock truck, a county rescue van. Vesper heard it first. Her ears lifted. She did not place herself between Sawyer and the road. Instead, she looked at him. Sawyer opened the door to Vesper House before the van reached the clearing. For most of his life, he had believed duty meant entering danger and bringing someone back. He had measured himself by the people he could carry, the threats he could recognize, and the moments when hesitation cost too much. But some forms of rescue did not begin with running toward fire. Sometimes they began with keeping a room warm, with learning when not to touch, with waiting beside fear instead of ordering it away, with opening a door before anything outside had to beg. The van came to a stop. Sawyer stepped off the porch. Vesper walked beside him. Behind them, 4 cedar bowls rested near the stove inside the cabin, each marked with a name. None of them was temporary anymore. Sometimes courage is not charging into danger. Sometimes it is refusing to look away, speaking when silence feels safer, and choosing mercy before anyone promises a reward. Vesper could not tell her story with words, but her survival reminded an entire valley that what is right often begins with one person willing to listen. In our own lives, we may never face a crisis this great, but we are still given small chances to protect, to speak honestly, and to leave a door open for someone who has nowhere else to go. What choice in this story stayed with you most? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God give you wisdom to recognize the moment when your kindness is needed, and the strength not to turn away.